The scale can be a source of both motivation and frustration for people on a weight loss journey. If you're struggling to manage your numbers, I'll show you how to use the scale effectively to track your progress. Unless you're a competitive athlete who needs to be in a particular weight class, most people don't really care how much they weigh. They just want to be leaner and look good. Maybe a bit more toned in certain areas, which for the record means that you have a bit more muscle and a bit less fat in that area. There's no such thing as toned muscles as such. Now I know a lot of fitness people tell you to throw the scale away, but just because something isn't a perfect measure doesn't mean that it doesn't have some useful information for you. If you're 200 pounds and the weight that you want for your personal preference is 170 pounds, then it's certainly going to matter and be visibly different when you lose 30 pounds. The scale becomes slightly less useful as you get closer to your target weight, or if you only have a small amount of weight to lose. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So unlike some fitness experts, I don't think you should throw the scale out the window. You could hit somebody. The scale also provides a lot of useful information that can keep you on track to your fat loss goals. But if somehow you've developed a bad relationship with the scale and it's somehow triggering, don't use it. So I'm going to look at a few common methods of doing weighing and how you can improve them and make them more useful for you. I am going to share a system that has helped some of my clients change their relationship with the scale. So if you're open to it, it may help you. And there, of course, are other measures of progress that I use with my clients to make sure they're successful on their overall fitness and their fat loss journey. So I'm going to share those as well. Now, the old traditional way of weighing that I used to use, let's say 15 years ago when I was still working in gyms. So most people came in twice a week, but at least on one of those days, we would do the weekly weigh-in to find out where they were. Now, there are so many issues with this system, part of which I'm going to get into when I show you what happened when I weighed myself for 30 days straight. But first, I'm going to tell you about the method that one of my clients was doing before he came to me to track his progress on the scale. See if you can spot all the issues as I explain his method. So he would weigh himself at the gym. He used to go 2 or 3 times a week at about 7 p.m. in the evening after work. Sometimes he'd weigh himself on a Monday evening after a weekend of lots of ultra-processed foods and a bit of drinking. And then other times he would weigh himself on a Thursday after he'd eaten several days, so Monday to Thursday, with lower calories and minimally processed foods that didn't have that much salt. And at first he didn't understand why this wasn't an effective way of tracking his weight, because he pictured his weight as fairly stable throughout the day and throughout the week. And this is what I'm going to explain for you now. When you do a weigh-in, you want to do it at consistent times and under similar conditions. To take your weight as accurately as possible, make sure you do it first thing in the morning, nude, after you've had your morning pee, but probably not your number 2 unless you're really regular. It's also important to use the same scale, and this seems silly, but if you've ever gone to different locations, your home scale will often be calibrated differently. I followed all these rules for 30 days, and keep in mind during this process that I wasn't trying to gain or lose weight. You can see that my weight varies from about 130 pounds all the way up to about 136 pounds first thing in the morning. And for 7 days, I also weighed myself in the morning compared to in the evening just before bed. My weight often varied by 2 or 3 pounds. Why did this happen? The first thing is hydration levels. So your fluid intake varies from day to day, and depending on what's coming in terms of fluids, what you're drinking, and what's going out in terms of expelling urine and even sweat for some people. I don't sweat that much, so it's not a big deal for me. But for a lot of people, they'll lose sweat as well. That's why you'll see athletes who are trying to cut on the last day, they're sweating it out to get those fluids out because that reduces their weight. They aren't losing any body fat, they're just losing all that water. A half a liter of water weighs a half kilo, which for the Americans is just over 1 pound. So if I drink 500 milliliters of water, half a liter, I should gain about 1 pound. And of course, that's what happens. You're literally adding that fluid to your body weight. Your fiber intake and where you are in your digestive cycle can also make a big difference. Someone who weighs 190 pounds could have a pound of fecal matter in their large intestine. If you weigh less, it's going to be less. So some days and certain times of day, you're more empty, and other times you're more full of. There are also hormonal changes that could be occurring for both men and women. Now, women, of course, have obvious changes over the course of the month. So prior to their periods, they're probably retaining a bit of extra water, so that's going to increase your body weight. But for both men and women, if you're going through a stressful time, your cortisol levels are a little bit higher. Cortisol can increase water retention as well. The system I use with many of my clients is called average weighing. I want to show you how I used it with one of my clients to not only track her fat loss progress more accurately, but to help her lose her worry about the results and the day-to-day numbers. She started at about 156 pounds, but there was quite a lot of variation during the week. I was always marking the average over the course of those 7 days. And if you look through that chart, each week, her average weight was going down. At the beginning, the rate of weight loss was a little bit faster, and as she got closer and closer to her goal weight, the rate of weight loss slowed down. This is exactly what you should expect. As you get closer and closer, leaner and leaner, it's slower. So you have to avoid getting discouraged when you see those numbers start to go down a little bit slower. Because if you look at what actually happened for my client over the course of this 12-week process, she went from about 156 pounds to 142 pounds during that 12-week process, which is amazing. And probably even more importantly, she did it in a sustainable way. This wasn't any crazy plan. I don't do those. It was just a gradual modification of what she was eating, including when she was traveling and when she was eating out for work. But you can see if she just looked at the numbers from a particular day and then weighed on a different day, then she might not get the right information. Some days it was a little bit high for the reasons I talked about earlier: fluid balance, digestion, natural variations. If she looked at one of those numbers on a random day and it was a little bit too high, and she said to herself, "Oh no, this isn't working," then that's exactly the opposite of what should be happening. When you look at your weight in an objective way, realizing that variations are going to occur, but that the overall big picture does matter, because if each of those data points always averaged out to the same weight, then she wouldn't have been making any progress. And it's important to know that as well, because if you're not progressing, you need to change something about your nutrition plan or your activity levels. Now, I generally don't do average weighing continuously unless someone has a focused goal like a photo shoot or a wedding that they're planning for. But this particular client felt that it was keeping her on track to be weighing herself consistently. And she started to think of this daily weigh-in as just one small data point that was giving her a little bit of information. Not a scary number that determined her success in her whole fitness and health journey. And it boosted her confidence and determination to keep going with her efforts. She also noticed many other things which are non-scale measures of progress that I give to many of my clients. I'm going to talk about those shortly. Now, of course, there are issues with frequent weighing. What I found when I first started trying to weigh myself is that some days I just forgot. And it would be later on in the day, I was like, oops, I forgot to weigh myself in the morning. It is tricky. Sometimes you're running around in the morning, you're like, oh, I didn't weigh myself. That's gonna happen. But there are 3 reasons when I don't think you should do it. If you see a number on the scale and it determines how you feel for the day, don't do it. If you get frustrated when you don't see big changes in the numbers quickly, don't do it. If you become obsessed with small differences in the scale and you adjust your nutrition or your exercise based on what you see in the morning, don't do it. And we know the scale is not always an accurate representation of body composition. That's how lean you are, the ratio of fat to muscle and other lean tissues. That's really what most of us want. And this becomes more important as you get leaner. If you are someone who has 30 or 40 or 50 pounds to lose, you're going to see a difference. Your body composition is going to improve as you lose that weight. You'll often see these side-by-side pictures on social media, particularly people who've discovered weight training. And it's very interesting because they'll show themselves and, they look flabbier or whatever. And then they'll show themselves like all gunned up and like much more muscle, and their weight is heavier with the muscle, but they're leaner. Yeah, that is absolutely a thing. Muscle is more dense than fat, so you fill up less space when you have more muscle. It's important to have realistic expectations when it comes to your weight loss. So if you're 200 pounds and your goal weight is 150 pounds, you'll probably drop 2 pounds a week at the beginning, but as you get closer and closer, say you weigh 160 pounds, that's gonna slow down. You might only lose a pound a week. It's natural for the rate of weight loss to go down because you're a smaller person. Larger bodies burn off more calories naturally than smaller bodies. Many people start to get discouraged when the rate of weight loss isn't as high anymore, and they start to revert back to their previous eating behaviors. They never reach their fat loss goal. We actually say that the maximum that you wanna lose is about 1% of your body weight per week in order to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. So if you're 200 pounds, then 2 pounds a week. And while 1 pound a week gets thrown around a lot, if you're within 5 pounds of your target weight, that could take you a lot longer to do. It could take you 10 or 12 weeks, or maybe even longer than that. Or if you're gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time because you're relatively new to this. At that point, weighing yourself doesn't give you as much useful information. So the non-scale measures of progress that I use with a lot of my clients, first is hip and waist measurements, because that's actually a good health indicator. Other body size measurements as well. Both my male and female clients seem to want to measure their arms to see where they're going, and some people like to measure thighs, their quads and hamstrings, basically. Whatever measurement is important to you, you can add that on. How your clothes fit is also important. Many times I've had clients say, oh, well, there's no change in the scale, but my clothes fit me a little better, especially around the waist. For most people, that's what they're aiming for. You can also use body fat scales to give you some information about your body fat percentage. They're not extremely accurate as an absolute value, but you can track your changes over time. You're gonna have the same issues with the scale, but probably even more so because the body fat is really dependent on hydration levels, so be careful with those. Calipers are another way of measuring your body fat. You're essentially just doing the area that most people care most about, the belly fat area or around the waist, and you see if that is coming down in terms of the thickness of fat. Now, the standard progress pictures are great. I do use those with some of my clients who want to see those changes. More recently, I started to use progress videos as well, so I'll have the client start from the front and just stand and then rotate to the side, to the back, and then to the other side, and then come back again. Sometimes my clients like to do a little pose down at the end to show off their muscles, and that's cool too. What I like about that is not only can you take screenshots at any position in order to see changes, but you'll also notice things that a straight-on photo won't always tell you. So as you're rotating, you might see that things are a little more lean around the midsection. There's a little bit more definition. You'll see these tiny little details in the video that you might not see otherwise. That can be really motivating. And aside from body composition, I like to measure progress in the gym in terms of strength and endurance, what you can actually perform and achieve. So how much weight you're able to lift now compared to what you could lift before. Maybe there's exercises you can do now that you couldn't do before, like pull-ups or dips. These are important things that can help you feel better if you're not seeing changes elsewhere. And sometimes seeing that progress with your fitness encourages you to be a bit more careful with how you're planning your nutrition, because you start to feel like, oh, I'm this fit person, I'm strong, and I want to eat in accordance with that belief about myself. Beliefs are a key thing that you need to change if you're aiming for consistent fat loss results, because you need to see yourself as that person that you want to be in order to change those behaviors for the long term. And also on the subjective side, how do you feel? Are you more energetic? Can you sprint up the stairs? Can you play with your kids in an energetic way without feeling exhausted afterwards? Those are all big wins on a fitness journey. Having these multiple measures of success will keep you motivated to continue with your nutrition and your workouts, even when you don't see the numbers changing on the scale. Sometimes you feel like you're stuck at a particular weight for a long time and you really want to push it a bit further. This video will show you how to overcome a weight loss plateau.